You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with our great podcast. We certainly, have I ever told you, we were just sat down and had a conversation, say, I really love the fact that you guys all listen to the show. I've ever told you that from the deepest part of my heart. Don't make me cry. Don't make me cry, but I love you, man. Anyway, guys, we love you. The family that loves you but doesn't judge you. The Chris Voss Show. Go to the Chris Voss Show. Refer it to your family, friends, relatives. Sit down and cry with them, too. I don't know. Don't do that. Anyway, guys, go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit the bell notification button. Goodreads.com/Chris Voss. The big 130,000 LinkedIn group, a link to newsletter, and all those crazy places that the kids are playing at. The Chris Voss Show is at these days as well. As always, we're probably in for some more brain bleeding. We had another guest on early this morning, and she was like, do people really brain bleed from your show? Clearly I am, because I can't even pronounce it. Anyway, we have an amazing new author on the show. As always, we have these brilliant gentlemen. We put them, and people, gentlemen and people, and women too. Aren't those people? I don't know. It's all those three, all of the above. And we put them in the Google machine, and out they come. He's the author of the newest book, September 15th, 2022. Just came out hot off the presses. Soul Winners, The Ascent of America's Evangelical Entrepreneurs by David Clary. He's on the show with us talking about his amazing book. And you're going to learn a lot today about how the world works and what's been going on in it. David Clary is an award-winning author and news editor at the San Diego Union Tribune. Clary's latest book is Soul Winners, as we mentioned before. It explores how America's entrepreneurial spirit has shaped evangelical ministries and influenced their worldview. Before joining the Union Tribune in 2002, he worked in a variety of editing and design roles at the Plain Dealer in Cleveland. Clary, a native of Central New York, is a graduate of Syracuse University with degrees in newspaper journalism and political science. Welcome to the show, David. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Thanks for coming. We certainly appreciate it as well. So give us your .coms, any place on the interwebs you want people to check you out.
Oh, thank you. I have an author website. That's davidclaryauthor.com. And on that site, I've got an excerpt from the book. I blog occasionally about things I see in the news. So there's lots of interesting stuff to check out there.
Awesome.
Awesome. davidclaryauthor.com.
There you go. And so what motivated you want to write this book?
Well, yeah, I've always been fascinated by why people believe in what they believe in. And then I became very interested in how those private religious beliefs have an effect on the public arena. And so I've just always been fascinated with religion and in its intersection with politics. And I found evangelicalism to be such a useful way to study that, because they're so, as I say in the book, they're so good at attracting audiences. You really need to understand the evangelicals to understand America and understand American politics. They're such a cohesive group. They're a large group. And so I just found that to be endlessly fascinating. And I looked at them as entrepreneurs, because a lot of people look at them as through the prisms of gender and race, and those are all really good ways to study them. But looking at them as entrepreneurs, and they're startup people. They look for a market and they try to find a market, they define a market, and then they go after it. And that makes them really very American and very unusual in the religious climate.
There you go. I don't think anybody's really keyed into the entrepreneurs behind American evangelical ministries, I suppose, per se. There's been a lot of discussion about them. So why did you pick the title Soul Winners?
That's an old expression that goes back centuries, and that's been seen as the job of pastors is to win people to Christ, to win people to Jesus. And that's been, and you go back 200 years, you go back 50 years, and even today, it's such a constant theme. And I think that also the idea of winning, that's a very business idea. You win a market, you win share. And that, so it just seemed to me that it's an old phrase, but it also has sort of a double meaning of you're trying to win over people and win at politics, win at business, and win at growing your church.
That makes sense. My family that's very religious calls me the soulless loser, but I seem to be winning. I don't know. It could be a matter of perspective or
right.
whether or not whether I'm saved or not or whatever all that means. So let's get into the book. What did you find in your discovery as you went into it? Is this segmented to a certain amount of time, or is this over 100 years, or how did you build this out?
Largely it's I focus on the period after World War II. I do start out with the way that America was founded, and that America was not founded with an official religion, which is the first, America was the first country in history not to have a state-sponsored official religion. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that's so interesting, that you hear people say, America's a Christian nation. And it's not true. It was not. America was explicitly not founded as a Christian nation. It was founded as, the founding fathers, most of them were not even Christian. They weren't practicing Christians. They believed religion was important, and they liked it. They thought it was a good, cohesive thing for the people, but they didn't think that America should be an Episcopal or Presbyterian or a certain denomination. They saw how that worked in Europe, and they didn't like to see the church have too much power. So I did start with that, and I went into some of the later figures, but I decided to concentrate more on World War II and after, because that's where you really see the intermingling of business and politics and evangelicalism. Is the Billy Graham period, and then Joel Roberts and Jerry Falwell and his activities in politics, and then the more modern folks like Joel Osteen and Rick Warren. I spent quite a lot of time writing about him. So I just thought, I think for the reader, it's good to have some background, but I think if you give too much background, it becomes like, well, how did this connect to today? And so I really wanted to focus on sort of the last 75 years or so.
Yeah, Billy Graham, I don't know, was he the first to really take religion to, stadium level? I mean, he was holding stadiums and talking to presidents, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the historian here, but he kind of seemed to have started that whole thing where, ever since then we've seen evangelical top entrepreneurs mingling with presidents' White Houses and stuff.
Yeah, there were large-scale evangelical leaders like Dwight L. Moody around the turn of the century. He drew really large audiences. Billy Sunday in the 1910s, 1920s. But yeah, I think you're right. I think Billy Graham is really the first in the sort of the modern age, the modern media age, the television age. He's someone he used television very effectively from very early on. And Oral Roberts also, he and Graham were born the same year, and they really moved on parallel tracks. So it's interesting to look at both their careers, although they had some different theologies, but they both used television. They drew large audiences in crusades, but also on TV. And you're right. I mean, Graham was very explicitly involved in politics. I think that evangelicals have had a conservative bent going back more than 100 years. But he was a very close counselor to Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower leaned on him for advice about civil rights since Graham was a Southerner. He really listened to what Graham had to say. And Graham was very involved with Richard Nixon to his detriment. He regretted becoming so close to a president, and he was a defender of Nixon's until the very end. And then later White House tapes came out with Graham having anti-Semitic slurs, and apologized for that later in life. But yeah, with Trump, Trump's main religious advisor is a woman named Paula White, who founded a megachurch in Florida.
Yeah.
And she's a prosperity gospel person, someone who says that if you pray hard enough and you donate money, then you'll get tangible financial benefits. And that's a very alluring idea. And Trump actually was flipping around one night and saw saw her on TV because she had a talk show. She was a talk show host, like an Oprah style show. And he was just like, oh, she's really great on TV. She's blonde, she's attractive. And so he contacted her and they became very close. And then when Trump became president, she was very close to Trump. She was in the White House quite a lot. She was probably the closest religious figure to a president since Billy Graham and Nixon in terms of the number of times in the White House, the impact on policy. And so, so that's why I thought if I could focus on the last 75 years, it brings a lot of what's happening now into sharper perspective. You can just see some of these patterns repeating.
So what did you find in the book? Did you find that has influenced, their interest in politics, values of the government? What factors that have had, entrepreneurs, and I'm sorry, I'll inject before that on that question. As an entrepreneur, I think from a specialty kind of brain that most people don't think from. I think of making a widget, finding something that will sell, that will make profits, and then exploiting that to the highest thing that I possibly can in a good character way. When I say the word exploit, but basically taking in, KFC, you take a piece of chicken and a great recipe and you're worldwide. And so you think from a very money oriented, very business oriented, very expansive oriented. How can I make more money doing this? You innovate. You're constantly going, how can we make more money? How can we do this? How can we do better? Ideally, the beauty of being an entrepreneur is if you serve others and provide a better product and improve their quality of life, you're usually paid directly in proportion to that, to the value usually. A person who's a doctor, obviously gets paid a whole lot more money than say somebody else because of, they save your life. So because of that, we're a little bit more money geared than most people and generating more money and doing whatever the hell we want. In fact, a lot of, our type of oligarchs, they influence government to they have as less regulation as possible so they can do whatever they want. Because once you reach pan-globalist level, you don't really care about democracy that much. You do business with anybody, it'll do business with you. So what did you find how that entrepreneur sort of mindset fed into, the last, 60, 70 years since World War II?
Yeah, I think that the breakthrough that evangelicals made is that they're the biggest market of people. If you're selling a product, the biggest market are people that don't own your product, right? So you go after, so their idea was you go after the unchurched. So the people who do not belong to a church, people who never belong to a church or don't care about church. And that was because before the mindset was always like, okay, I'm the pastor of a Catholic church and I'm going to go after all the Catholics in this area. And I'm going to give them what I believe they want. And what someone like Rick Warren, who's a really good example of a startup businessman, he was influenced by Peter Drucker, who is the founder of modern management theory. That was one of his main mentors. And Drucker taught him the customer decides what a business is. Mm-hmm. And you need to go after, you have to give customers value. And so Warren was he was in seminary in Texas and he didn't want to he was a Southern Baptist. He didn't want to start a church in Texas. There's a Baptist church in Texas, but there's so many. So he did market research. He looked at, what are the fastest growing areas? And this is in the late 70s. And he found out the fastest growing place is Saddleback Valley in Orange County, California. So he moved, he and his wife packed up their truck and moved to Orange County, didn't know anybody. And he started out with, there was no church. I mean, he just founded a church in his living room and then the church congregation met at schools, theaters, and anywhere he could find. They didn't have an actual building. But when he went there, he went door to door and asked people, what do you want in the church? I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people houses for weeks. And he just knocked on doors. What do you want in a church? And then basically people said, church is boring and, and I don't like that there's no childcare, so I have my kids and they're not paying attention. And then also I feel like the church isn't relevant to what I want and they're unfriendly. When you go to a church and you feel like, everybody knows each other and I'm an outsider. So he designed Saddleback, his church is Saddleback Church. He designed his church around what people want. He didn't dream up, an idea. Here's what a church should be. And I'm going to give it to people. And then if they don't want it, then tough. He really designed his church around the needs of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So when he started his church, they had a high quality program for kids, childcare. He dressed in a Hawaiian shirt, and he just talked about, things that were relevant to people. And he understood the community. The community at that time was an upwardly mobile community, and people that maybe they went to church when they were kids, but stopped going. So when he started his church, there's no crosses, there's no statuary, there's no symbolism. It was just, we want to welcome everybody. We want people to feel comfortable. We don't want people to feel like they don't belong. And so the church ended up being the largest in the country. It was 30,000 members, and he had a whole blueprint of growth. His whole thing is about growth. If companies need to grow, and if companies are static and they just hold on to yesterday, they won't evolve. So he was not afraid to throw away things that didn't work. And he founded a consultancy for thousands of other churches that followed him. And then there's other they call them pastorpreneurs, where they do the same thing, where they have templates that you follow. And I visited 9 different churches, for this book. And I went to a broad range of them, and there's some similarities. They're very welcoming to newcomers. There's a welcome desk, and they give you, a cooler and a t-shirt and a hat, and pens, and
shit. I'm going to go join. Get a hat.
I know they get you. You go in a lot of Starbucks, a Starbucks style coffee bar.
Wait,
so they give you, they get
free coffee. I'm converting. Damn it.
Latte is not. It's.
I don't get any coffee.
So and then you go in there, and it's very comfortable seating. It's like going into a theater. It's like going to see a Broadway show. It's stadium seating, and there's no kneelers. And you walk in, and there's big video boards, and there's usually a big band, 12-piece band, very high energy, and you're not lost in the service. There's no like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to stand up. This is where I'm supposed to kneel. Oh, these people are praying this prayer. I don't know what this prayer is. And they want to make it as welcoming as they can. And that's why they succeed. They really give people what they want. And just like any entrepreneur, I mean, you have to give people you have to fill a need. That's marketing 101 is filling a need and understanding what that need is. And they do that very well.
People something to commute to. The gentleman you were talking about earlier, is he the one who built the big, I forget, it's the Crystal or the big glass church, that giant?
Oh, that's also in Orange County. That's Robert Schuller who did that.
Okay.
So that's a little further up the road in Orange County. But yeah, he's also in the book. He's also in the book too, because he was very active on TV. He had the Hour of Power. You might remember that on syndication. He was a very popular preacher. And I actually talked to his son, who was a very interesting interview, because the whole ministry collapsed because the old man hung on too long. And that's something you see a lot in these, and with any family business, like the old man doesn't want to leave, and he stays around, and he actually had dementia, and he was at these meetings, and these meetings would go on for hours, and nothing would be decided. And he also stuck to what worked 20 years ago, but it wasn't working today. So then I think the other problem a lot of these churches have is like there's a lot of husband and wife teams that operate these churches, a lot of families and in-laws, and it sort of becomes there's no financial controls, and there's a lot of self-dealing that goes on, and a lot of people have jobs they shouldn't have, and they make money they shouldn't have. So yeah, Robert Schuller so the church is actually, the glass church is still there, but it was because the Crystal Cathedral went into bankruptcy. They sold it to the Catholic Church in Orange County. So now it's the cathedral for the Orange County's Catholic Church, which is sort of a funny irony, because it's actually went in there. It was interesting to see how it's been outfitted to be a Catholic church.
An old guy hanging on too long, running his business like the old days. Were you talking about my Raiders and Al Davis? Sorry, I'm a little angry over this season.
That's interesting too, where it's like, I don't want to veer off too far, but you have his son, was signing somebody who should run a large corporation or a large company. Probably not, but he got it because he inherited it. So, I mean, you see that in football, you see it in baseball, where you have like the son has it and he doesn't really know what he's doing. And
he probably with that haircut. But no, I mean, really what you're mentioning is these are what entrepreneurs and owners, and these guys are really business people. They're
right.
When you peel back the layers, it's funny. You're talking about coffee and all the free stuff you can get at going to churches. You might have me converted. I mean, I've been an atheist for years. I don't get free coffee when I go to Spirit Rhino on Sundays to pray. Sorry, I had to put that joke in there. So, but let's talk about, do you cover Pat Robertson and this 700 Club? And we kind of led into the mega churches and the big broadcasting sort of thing. I think you talk about that in your book as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pat Robertson, he started CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network, and that was he was a real visionary. He was ahead of his time. He could see where cable was going, and he was very early to recognize if I can by the time or by the the satellite time, that will disseminate to millions of homes. And so he was really ahead of his time. He ran for president in 1988. So he didn't get too far, but he did better than I think most people thought. And then from the ashes of that came the Christian Coalition, which was Robertson and Ralph Reed, who I interviewed for the book. And it was interesting talking to Reed about his mentality. He was very young when he started with Pat Robertson and the Christian Coalition. And Reed was really a political organizer. He's not a pastor, but he knows how to organize. And he did a very effective job kind of elevating those issues, because you compare that to the moral majority. A lot of people talk about that, and that was in the 80s with Jerry Falwell. But a lot of the people that were running the moral majority were pastors. They weren't political types. And Jerry Falwell was very, very blunt about things he would say, and he would often be his own worst enemy, with his comments. Where Reed is very smooth and he's very PR aware, and so that's where the family values language comes in, where Jerry Falwell would rail against abortionists and he'd use very harsh language, or Reed would use very comforting language. Like we want to defend the rights of the family and family values and things or school choice was another one. We want to have school choice. Well, that means that they don't want to have as much money go toward public schools and more money going to schools. That's what school choice really means. But so he was a very effective organizer. Pat Robertson, he's also he also steps in it quite a lot with his comments after 9/11. He and Falwell were blaming the abortionists for the attack on September 11th. And he apologized for that, and they railed against gay people as well. So, but he was and he never had a church. He only had a TV ministry. So it's interesting how these people, Greg talked about Rick Warren before. He never had a TV ministry. He never, he just never wanted that. Mm-hmm. They look at Robert Schuller. He had a TV ministry and a large church. You look at Joel Osteen, and it pretty much is just a TV show, and it is a church as well. But the emphasis is definitely on the TV for him.
So what did you surmise in your book, or do you surmise anything in your book, or do you just kind of profile these guys, talk about the slant of entrepreneurship in what they do and what they built? Is there any sort of thing that you say, well, because of this, here we are?
Yeah, I think, the hardest part of the book was deciding who to leave out, because there's so many interesting characters that I really wish I could have spent more time on, but it would have been a 500-page book, and I don't have the time to write
That's
a book
too.
Long.
There you go.
yeah. So, but the people I looked at, I think I came away with understanding the mentality of an entrepreneur and how many times over these ministries were supported by big business, supported by wealthy people. I've been going back more than 100 years. I write about Billy Sunday, who was a really well-known professional baseball player, and then he became a pastor, and then he was a traveling crusader, and he would draw 20,000 people in New York City for weeks and weeks. And he was so popular, there was no church that could actually hold the number of people who wanted to see him. So they had to actually build a tabernacle out of nothing that would cover the size of a football field. And so how do you build, a tabernacle out of nothing? Well, he had John D. Rockefeller Jr. would be on his finance board, and he he would tap all of his rich friends to build this huge tabernacle for Billy Sunday because, they liked what Sunday had to say. Sunday was against labor unions. He was very pro. He didn't think that there should be social service. He didn't like the idea of, we need to help the poor and the government has to get involved. His attitude is, we live in an individualist society and it's all about soul winning. It's all about converting people to Jesus. It's not about running soup kitchens and helping people. And those are messages that really, if you go down the decades, it's very consistent where it's, these people have this mentality of we get help from really rich people, we get help from businesses to fund our ministries, and then in turn, we say the things, we share a lot of the same ideas that our benefactors have, and now in the last 40 years we've seen it interwoven so closely with politics, and that, to the point where the Republican Party is the most important element of the Republican Party are evangelicals, white evangelicals, I should say. Yeah. And that they are the definers of what that party will do. And so you could not win the nomination for president and not have a support of evangelicals. It's not possible. And they turn out, they vote, they donate, they organize now in a way that's larger than their numbers.
That really makes sense. One of the problems I've always had, because I read the Bible when I was young, I grew up in religion. To me, when Jesus throws the money changers out of the temple, that's been one of the biggest dichotomies that I've felt. And I think other people have seen it too, where you see these ultra rich Joel Osteen guys, you see, who's the one guy who's like, lately there's been a whole bunch of them. They're like, you need to make me rich. You need to buy me a jet. I need a Gulfstream, whatever, 50 million. Yep. We need y'all to, fork up. I remember we used to have a business that I worked with when I was young, where we would get all the newsletters from the Southern Baptists, not just Southern Baptists, but all the churches around the nation. And I was always surprised when I would see the ads in it that would say, make sure that you sign over your will to give your estate to the church. Screw your kids or something. I didn't say that, but basically that was it. I'm like, why would you give all your crap to your church? Give it to your kids. But I don't know. I've seen kids and I could probably understand why some kids, but no, the biggest dichotomy is you look at that, but it's interesting to me. You've tapped onto something that for years, the Republican Party has been anti-union. Of course, if you understand, a lot of the history, we've talked about great authors like yourself on the show, going back to the Great Southern Strategy of Nixon, why they did that, the changeover unions from Republicans to Democrats, and, the whole funding and all that money thing. But that explains why they are pro-business and they think from that entrepreneur slant as opposed to, hey, you guys are the money changers in the temple. That makes sense to me now.
Yeah, and one of the real stumbling blocks, when I talk about this book to friends or family or your colleagues, I think one thing they always say is, why are these people, these pastors have all this money and they've got private planes and mansions, and that's not right. And you mentioned Joel Osteen. I mean, he lives, he and his wife, they're co-pastors at Lakewood Church in Houston. They own a $12 million mansion in Houston, and I think their net worth is about $50 million. And I think that people have a real problem with that. And why aren't they giving money to the poor? Why are they taking such large sums of money? And I think what I've found out is that I think America is an aspirational culture. We all think we can be rich someday. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're told by these pastors, and you look at these pastors, and they have, some of the younger pastors have $1,000 sneakers, and they have, they've got fancy cars. And I think they look at that as something to aspire to, that this person came from poverty, and that could be me. This person is a success, and that could be me. If I pray hard enough, and if I give donations, and I listen to what this person has to say, if I buy the books and I go to, listen to the podcasts, and I go to church, go to this person's church, then I can be successful too. That's a very powerful American idea is this aspirational culture. And the evangelicals tapped into that very effectively. And I mean, you mentioned the private plane, and I've heard of a guy named Kenneth Copeland. He's been on TV for decades. He has his own private airplane, his own private airport outside of Fort Worth, Texas. And he has several private planes, and he actually tells his followers, I need to upgrade. I have to upgrade to a Gulfstream 5. And people give him the money. Like,
yeah.
And he brags. He's like, you bought this. This $20 million aircraft. And he posted a video, bragging about it. And to me, that is extraordinary that people would give money to somebody who obviously is extremely wealthy. But I think if you think of the mentality that some people have, that they see hope, they see like, oh, this person, if I follow this person, I can be like him. And maybe I can have success, financial success in life, and turn around my financial ruin, go from ruin to riches. I mean, it's a very powerful idea.
Yeah, Kenneth Copeland. Yeah, and I think he was one of the guys I was thinking of. There's a famous video of him being confronted by a reporter.
Yes,
being really kind of a crazy reply, and I see it all the time everywhere. But yeah, it's. America is kind of a weird place with our whole capitalism system. Like there seems to, I've read studies or at least suggestions of studies that people, we all believe, there's a line that I love from Fight Club. We're all raised being told that we're getting millionaires or rock stars, and we're slowly finding out that we won't be. And we're very pissed off about it. If I can quote that right, forgive me if I get it wrong. Don't sue me, Brad Pitt. Just keep calling me for, beauty advice, but I gave him horrible marriage advice though, so that didn't work out. Anyway, I would never tell him to do that. But segues aside, they say that that's one of the reasons with capitalism why people are kind of like, well, we shouldn't give the oligarchs or rich people rules because I plan on being rich someday. And it's kind of this delusion that we have in this country, and it's interesting that still that plays into the religion aspect of our country. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's done that for many years. You go back to Oral Roberts. I mean, you would have his whole philosophy was called seed faith, and so it's the idea that you have to, just like if you want to grow a plant, it starts with a seed. So you plant a seed, and then the plant will grow. Well, the same is true with church. So if you plant a seed, which means a donation, you pray over it, and then it'll blossom into financial riches. And that was something he taught. Mm-hmm. And that's still taught today. I mean, I turn on TV and they talk about seed faith, planting a seed. So and if it doesn't work, then you got to plant another seed. Maybe you need to donate more. You need to pray harder. and it does get to the point. I know it is sad because there are people that they don't have the money to give to this.
Yeah.
They don't have the wherewithal to spend, even if it's $50 a month. Like, that's a lot of money for someone who's older and is on a fixed income. But if they think that, well, that could turn into something, that could turn into a great fortune. And why not me? Why can't it happen to me? I believe. But it is sort of sad because you think of like, well, if it's not happening for you, then, there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not praying hard enough, or I don't deserve it, or I'm not faithful enough. And I am troubled with that, because I do feel like that's you're going into exploitation of people's feelings and
their money.
Their money.
Yeah, there's people that be broke. I had a relative that came in one time and said, I need to refinance my house because I can't afford to live right now, and I need to take some cash out of my equity because I can't afford to live. I'm going broke. And I'm like, okay, well, let's do that. I owned a mortgage company for 20 years. So I sat down with their finances, and they were outputting $250 a month to their church. And I'm like, you contribute to $1 billion church that's one of the 12 largest landholders. I think it's 8 now, largest landholders in America. I'm pretty sure God will give you a break for a little while if you want to skip that $250 a month, because that would actually really do well for you. But no, we couldn't give that up. And it's really interesting. You see these, like there was the preacher recently, and I think in New York, who was mugged wearing $1 million on the stage.
That's right.
Like, who would do that, number one? But number two, who would do that without security? Or maybe they were security. I don't know. They got jumped. But, it's just insane. But you've helped explain a lot of things as to why, I've always kind of looked at church from the Jesus, give and whatever. And I've kind of wondered why these guys have that sort of thing, but it explains a lot to me. Explains a lot. And those of you who'd like to give to the Chris Voss Show, you can go to iTunes, give us a 5-star review over there. And I promise you, you will have prosperity of a great feeling when you do. Might last 5 seconds or something, but you will have it or something. You'll have something. I don't know what it is. So this has been very insightful. Anything more you want to tease out in the book before we go?
No, I really appreciate the time, Chris, and the discussion. And, I really appreciate being able to talk about all this.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. One thing I did want to mention, I've lived in Vegas for 20 years, and your book, Gangsters to Governors, we should plug into.
Yeah, that was my first book. So it came out 5 years ago. And yeah, that was, it's interesting that I wrote about gangsters and then I wrote about pastors. I don't know.
I see where
but there are some similarities where a lot of those casino operators, they were entrepreneurs too. People like Steve Wynn, and they took a risk. They got involved in a business, and I also like the mentality of the people. There's a lot of gamblers that should not be spending money sitting on a slot machine. And you've been in Vegas and you've seen, you go through the casino and you see somebody on an oxygen tank and they got two slot machines going, and it's like, it's so sad because they don't have the money for this, and they're just losing money. They're losing money twice as fast as they would have just at one machine.
But there's that little ladies playing those penny machines, with the oxygen tank, and you're like, honey, you're on fixed income. You need to go home.
Why not me? Why can't I win? I could win the jackpot. And then it's similar to the seed faith. It was like, well, why can't I could turn my life around. And
yeah. I mean, every when you live in Vegas, everybody you meet that's an addicted gambler, they always have a system, and the system always wins, but they're always broken. They just need to borrow money from you. And then they always have a pocket full of their loser receipts. And but they always they'll tell you about their losses from most times, but usually because they need to borrow money. But then they'll tell you, hey, I just won $4,000 on the Royal or whatever at the bar. And you're like, yeah, but you've lost 20,000 this month. So who cares? They're like, no, you don't understand. It's their version of math is, but the Goodmans, the gangster lawyers for the gangsters, in fact,
Oscar Goodman,
Oscar. Right. I mean, he's a really nice guy. I think he was a pretty good mayor for us. I think he was a pretty good mayor for us. I don't know. Vegas is kind of a town we're all drunk here. What do we know what's good? I don't know. But I loved how he would always show up with the girls. The girls, martini glass in hand. But he defended a lot of the big mobsters.
Right.
In the movie Casino. And I think probably a few others were Goodfellas or whatever. But and then he goes to be, the big guy in the thing. So great book there. Last question I have for you, since you're a San Diego editor, the San Diego Union Tribune, and we kind of forayed into football. How are you guys doing down there losing the Chargers?
Yeah, that was a very traumatic, traumatic experience.
It was mean.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's still some residual Chargers love here, that especially when Rivers and Gates were still on the team, because I think I was a fan of those players. So as long as even though they were in LA, actually they were in Carson during that time, I still supported them. But now that they're retired, it's hard to root for them. And, so we talked about Dean Spanos, this is a guy who was a son, Alex Spanos was the owner, the patriarch, and he was the guy he made his fortune. He was an immigrant, and then his son inherits it, and his son couldn't run a 2-car, parade. I mean, he just doesn't know what he's doing, and he's not smart. And he should have taken the Las Vegas deal. He could have had Las Vegas sold him a stadium, and he could have had that market all to himself. So instead, he's sharing a stadium with the Rams. We call them the LA Lodgers, because they're paying rent to us, to Stan Kroenke, and nobody cares about the Chargers in Los Angeles. I mean, people in Los Angeles care about the USC and high school football, and the Chargers. I mean, there's no interest in them. So it's sad, and I do take some pleasure when they very typically give up a game at the end and, stumble all over themselves.
Was that with Rivers or after Rivers?
No, like now. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I don't mind when they stumble and they don't make the playoffs. It's like I get a little thrill out of that. But,
yeah. I mean, I'm a Raiders fan. We just give it the season right away. So there's that. It's weird that Rivers should have I think he should have at least got a Super Bowl. Super Bowl.
I know.
I mean, I never did like him. But that's because I'm a Raiders fan.
Yeah, I never even played them.
Yeah, he didn't. He went to the playoffs, right?
Went to the playoffs. Yeah, he went to the
little
championship game
for most of his career.
Yeah.
But the older Peyton. But yeah, I mean, he always seemed like a great quarterback who should have. But I mean, that's the business. Anyway, it's wonderful to have you on, David.
Great to be here.
Covered the whole gambit from.
What a great conversation. Something for everybody.
There you go. Something for everybody.
Yeah.
So give us your plugs one more time, your .com, so people can find you on the internet.
Yeah. So it's davidclaryauthor.com. And so there you can find an excerpt of the book and then my blog. And then the book Soul Winners is available now through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere that sells books. So please pick it up.
There you go. And then you can, if you want to do a second book called Soulless Losers, what my family calls me. I think Satan or Black Sheep is the other terms that they use for me, but that's okay. I pray for them every time I go to the Spearmint Rhino.
Or maybe I'll do another book about gambling, soulless.
Yeah, there you go. Soulless. That'd be, I got some stories for you from living in Vegas.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. There's certain people that when you meet them in this town, you're just like, we can't be friends because you have a problem.
Yeah. You're going to drag me down with you.
Yeah. Can I borrow some money? Where's the checkbook? I don't know. I can't find it. Why's the bank at me? Anyway, thank you very much, David, for being on the show.
Really thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mountains, for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Go to LinkedIn. All those crazy places all the kids are playing. Be sure to order the book wherever fine books are sold. Stay away to those alley bookstores. Soul Winners, The Ascent of America's Evangelical Entrepreneurs, came out September 15th, 2022. Be good to each other. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time.